at UFC 284, the lone New Zealander on the card, coming off a near 2-year layoff. We have Smokin Shane Young representing City Kickboxing, taking on the former CFFC featherweight champ and Dana White's Contender Series contract winner, El Animal, Blake Bilder, a guy who's originally out of Minnesota, trains out a sub fighter over in California. He's been getting rounds in at 10th Planet Las Vegas for this fight, training with some great fighters over there. And we talked about that gym a lot. Really, Casey Halstead and the crew, they don't necessarily get the credit that they deserve. But for Blake Bilder, a big-time opportunity. And you look at that win that he had over on Dana White's Contender Series. And I know going into that fight, we talked about how good Alex Morgan was, his opponent, a former TKO featherweight champ, a guy that trains at a TriStar. And for Bilder, he just kind of had to find his rhythm in that fight, which is really the story of every single Blake Bilder fight. But I say he had to find his rhythm. He landed a couple of really nice shots, landed a glancing right hand that really stunned Morgan. And at the same time that he stunned him, oh my gosh, Morgan goes down a little bit. Bilder just jumps to the back, and like a spider monkey, he's able to sink in that choke and get the tap. And for Bilder, a really good opportunity. Now, Dana White after that fight said exactly what I expected Dana White to say. And I quote, "I'm going to start with Blake. And I guess the best way to start with Blake is, I'm not looking for 32-year-olds. Dana White, ladies and gentlemen, said the same thing about Trey Ogden on Dana White's Looking for a Fight. And then they, of course, signed him. So for Blake Bilder, he's a guy that did get started in MMA. Well, not that young. Like, he did get started as an amateur quite a while ago, way back in 2012. And he went 7-0 as an amateur, 7-0-1 as a pro. That started in 2018. But you go back and you watch a lot of these Blake Bilder fights, and I don't need to tell you this about rallying back in the fights. He fights with some smaller organizations, regional scene, and then he goes and fights with CFFC about a year ago. Now, last year was wild for him. He takes on Frank Buenafuente. He gets the win there, wins the belt, and then he defends it against Regivaldo Carvalho. Now, neither one of those guys, Buenafuente was taking that fight on a day's notice. He was supposed to be on the prelims, then he's all the way into the main event. And Carvalho, neither one of those guys were necessarily the highest of touted fighters. And Bilder almost got finished by both of them very, very early on.
And that's the wild thing about a guy like Blake Bilder. To the highest degree, it does remind you a little bit of a Michael Chandler in just this respect. If he hits you, you are going down. If he gets on your back, you are getting choked out. But if you land a big power shot up the middle while he's going for some of those bigger actions, you can also have some success of your own right. It just really comes down to how confident are you standing in the pocket against a guy like Blake Bilder? Because if you're able to stand there, be educated, just be present, I guess the term that I'm looking for, and be able to throw your own combinations, you should be able to have success against a guy like Blake Bilder if you can avoid some of those bigger shots, because he does leave himself open. Some of those uppercuts can land, some of the hooks around the guard can land too. He doesn't have the most educated of defenses to where he's going to be making you miss and be slipping all of your shots. But that's the thing about a guy like Shane Young. He's going to try to be on the outside a little bit more, and he's not as comfortable from that set pocket position as I think a guy like Blake Bilder will be. So I'm very curious to see how Shane Young's going to dictate pace and just his distance in this fight, because I think Young is the better kicker, and I do think he can have more success some of his straight shots on the back foot with his counterattack. I'm just curious to see how many of Bilder's shots he can stand up to, because it's like the old Doris Burke in 2K12 pound the rock. If at first you don't succeed, try again. If Blake Bilder's first hook doesn't knock you down or out, that's fine. The second, third, fourth, and fifth are all going to be there, and he does have great finishing instincts. It's not like a guy like Jeff Neal who's going to be very reserved and pick his shots, but when Bilder has you hurt, he's going to throw a lot at you, and we have seen Young struggle with some of that adversity and some of that aggression in his UFC tenure up until that point, so I think this is a really good debut for a guy like Bilder. We just talked about Zubaira Tukhugov fighting Brenner, and how that's probably a little bit of a step too far in your debut. I think this is a much better matchup.
Yeah, for Shane Young, looking for his first win in years. I mean, it's been a really weird run for Shane Young. Obviously now, he somewhat quasi-trains with the guy that he fought in his UFC debut in Alexander Volkanovski. Has some really, really good wins against Orlando D and Austin Arnett. It was a fight of the night against D, a 2-round banger, but it was the elbows that were able to get him the win. The first one lands and just cuts him up completely. The second one lands like the forearm and the elbow, and that's pretty well all she wrote. But after that fight, and the big time, he just put the pressure on Austin Arnett, dropped him at the very end of that fight. He takes on Ludwig Klein and gets finished early. He takes on a well-rounded Omar Morales, and he can't really figure out the game plan. He looked kind of just static in that one.
I won't say he looked worse in the Omar Morales fight than he did in the Klein fight because he got finished so early in the Klein fight, but you know what I mean when I say that. Like, the Omar Morales fight, Young just kind of looked flat. Like, Morales hurt him with that knee up the middle. He just kind of dominated him throughout a lot of that matchup, and for Young, I was maybe not the highest on him before the Klein fight, but even after the Klein fight, I thought, okay, Omar Morales is a fun matchup. That's a good litmus test for both guys, an important fight for both guys, because neither one of them were necessarily on the best track of their careers. I just think for Young, he really needs this one. Like, if the Omar Morales fight was the, hey, let's figure out where you are in the division, the Blake Bilder fight is, hey, do you still belong in this division?
Well, and that's it. For Blake Bilder, you go back and watch those fights, and I mean, in the fight against Buenafuente, he gets dropped twice in the first round. The fight that he has in the next title defense gets dropped in the first round as well. For Shane Young, looking for his first win since 2019, that fight against Austin Arnett. And of course, Arnett and D no longer in the UFC. So we have a look at the odds in the matchup. Young, a minus 130 favorite. Bilder at a plus 110. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprise to us as they are to you.
I think they'll be close.
Yeah, Young's slightly favored, but I'm going to say over under 62.5% Bilder. Just on the win streak. He's never lost a fight, pro and amateur.
I think it'll be under. I think they'll be very close to 50.
It's going to be very close. 616 total votes, 86% Bilder, 57% by decision, 32% by submission. Matt, Shane Young is chopped liver with the fans over on Topology. And for me, Young's got a great shot first round, even second round against a guy like Bilder to really capitalize on some of those defensive mistakes that Bilder can make. Because for Bilder, you talk about it, he starts to roll as the fight goes on, and in 5-round fights is perfect. Like, I think Blake Bilder, doesn't matter if you're 32, it doesn't matter about the 5-round fights. I do think he has really good cardio, and he's one of those guys that, like, he just gets flash knocked down like Michael Chandler, but he's got that dog in him. So if you do look at the matchup, Matt, do I think Blake Bilder's going to host the next season of The Ultimate Fighter after Chandler McGregor? Probably not. But do I think he's got an opportunity in the fight? Sure. It's just a big reset for Shane Young, and obviously that's where your question marks come from.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Normally, I would pick the person who has more UFC experience, whether or not they've been successful at that level, because I really do think experience is an important thing at the UFC level. You're fighting other guys who've made it to the biggest organization. They have been much more battle-tested than a lot more of the fighters you're going to fight in the regional scene. But Young really didn't impress me in that Omar Morales fight. No, Omar's a guy who I don't think is on the front nine of his career, if I'm putting it extremely lightly. So even though I've seen Blake Bilder be tested against some not great fighters, and that's the big thing, I don't think Blake Bilder's going to have the highest ceiling in the world. I think he can have a lot of fun fights in the UFC. But again, I do worry about where he is going to end up in the overall hierarchy of the division. I do like him in this matchup, though. I think he can get on the inside and make the fight uncomfortable for Shane Young. And I think that's a really important thing you have to do if you want to beat a guy like Shane Young.
And I think Shane Young, with his striking acumen, he's going to be expecting the takedowns from Bilder. But as I mentioned, Bilder spent part of this camp, and I listened to an interview that he did not that long ago with Ryan Gerald, so make sure you check that one out, All Access MMA. But in that one, Bilder touches on the fact that he had that camp in Vegas, but he also, from his Instagram, got his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from Felipe Fagoli at Triunfo Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. That was this past Saturday. So a week before he fights Shane Young, he gets his BJJ black belt. And if he goes out there like a guy who fought on his week of Dana White's Contender Series this past summer, like a Rabisti, Mateusz Rąbecki, and just goes out there from the start and tries to implement that game plan, or at least disguise it with some of his strikes, I think the Bilder has that advantage on the ground, and I think he can use that to win out against Shane Young.
That must be a great confidence builder, getting your black belt a week before an MMA fight. Like, not that I think he's going to go out there and just become Damian Maia all of a sudden, but you're in a pretty good headspace going into an MMA fight if you just got your black belt the week before. But I also have Bilder.
Both of us going with El Animal, Blake Bilder, to get the win. Big time card coming up this weekend, UFC 284. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.